Hi guys, I'm Paul from Viezu and Paramount Performance, and today I would like to show you this beautiful XKR. So this is a 2013 vehicle. She has done just a lovely 15,000 miles from new, and I have a huge soft spot for these cars. In fact, this was the first Jaguar that I ever purchased new. I'd owned Jaguars before, but I was delighted back in 2010 to buy a brand new XKR, and I love them. I think they're everything that Jaguars should be about. They've got this beautiful classic driving style. They're not hard sports cars, they're a real gentleman's touring car, and I think they're great. So I'd like to show you around this car today. I'm going to show you a couple of things to watch out for if you own one of these vehicles, and perhaps more importantly, if you're looking to buy one, things that you might want to look for, and some of the things that do tend to go wrong, particularly as the cars get a little bit older. Now, before I get into talking to you particularly about Jaguars and some of the issues that go wrong with these XKRs, I'll talk to you first, if you don't mind. You may have heard some of my videos before, and I don't want to be repeating myself, but I do have a few top tips of buying any car, in fact, and that's where I would just like to start, if that's okay with you. So when I'm looking to buy a car these days, before I run out and start to look at anything, I like to do a little bit of history, and I would recommend the same to you. Do a little bit of background checking, a little bit of homework if you like. 3 things I always like to see when going to look for a car. I want to see the MOT history. I want to be able to look at the mileage of all of the previous MOTs and make sure it stacks up with what I'm now looking at in the advert for the car. I also want to look at any advisories that the MOT inspector may have picked up. Now, if you're not in the UK and you're not sure what this word is, this MOT word that I keep using, Ministry of Transport test. It's very common to know in other countries there's a yearly fitness test, so this is where you subject your vehicle for someone independent to look at your vehicle and make sure it's safe to use on the road. Now in the UK, the MOT inspector may fail your vehicle, he may pass it, and he may also make observations, and the observations is I want you to be looking at here. So they might pick up on things like worn tyres, worn brakes, worn suspension components, rust, etc, etc. It's not that these items are so bad that they'll cause the vehicle to fail the MOT, but they are going to need future work. So by looking at the MOT history and the observations, you may get a clear indication of some things you want to be looking at if and truly when you go on to look at the vehicle itself. So MOT history is important. You of course probably want to look at the service history too, and I would ask the seller of any vehicle to send me that service history, and I want to look at the past history, look at the dates, look at the mileage, and make sure they tie up very nicely with the MOT mileage that I've got. So those 2 documents want to work hand in hand. I tend to like a vehicle to be serviced at a main dealer during the warranty period. Outside of warranty, I can get a little bit more relaxed about that, and I'm quite happy for vehicles to be serviced that I'm looking at a specialist, for example, but it's always nice to see if that specialist has used genuine Jaguar parts. It's the icing on the cake for me. And then another thing I like to see and carry out is a HPI check. These things are quite cheap these days, about £9, £9.50 or something in the UK will get you a HPI check, and that will show you particularly any accident damage that's been carried out, any serious accident damage that's been reported. Again, it will show you the mileage, and very importantly, it will show you any outstanding finance on the vehicle. So when you're going to look at a vehicle and you're meeting the seller of the vehicle, you want to know really he does own this vehicle outright and it's not partly owned by a finance company, and the HPI check will show you that. So those 3 things together give you a pretty good idea of how the vehicle's been looked after, its history, and the condition that hopefully you're expecting to see when you see it. And do check the logbook too. I like to see the person that I am meeting, his name is on the logbook, his or her name is on the logbook, the number of keepers, and really I want to actually go and inspect, if at all possible, the vehicle at the address on the logbook. And what I'm doing here is making sure this is not a middleman that's stepping in the way, a trader perhaps who isn't actually the guy on the logbook and doesn't really know the history of the vehicle. Seeing all that come together and then having the opportunity to see the vehicle at the address on the logbook, that just sounds just right for me, and they're the kind of things I want to look at before I bother to jump in my car, drive halfway across the country to go and see a vehicle that may turn out to be a total dog. Once all the paperwork stacks up, and I think this is a car that is of great interest to me and I want to go and see, my next recommendation would be ask the seller of the vehicle not to start the car on the day that you're coming out. You would like to start this car from cold, and I always think that's a really good thing to do. Once you get there, of course, we need to do some initial bodywork inspections, etc. And on these cars, like I guess all cars, I like to take my time, walk around the car, nice and slowly, and what I'm looking really for is any paintwork issues. So I want to get down, I want to look for any kinks or damage on any of the panels. I want to look for any overspray, maybe on bumpers or plastic trims or anything that shows the vehicle's had any paintwork. And I often find with these Jaguars where they have had a bit of paintwork, sometimes the paint has not been very well prepared. And the little telltale will be little bits of lacquer that are just starting to pick up on the corners of doors and things like that. The lacquer might peel in various different places, and that shows me that it's had some paintwork, but not only has it had paintwork, but probably it hasn't had the best of paintwork. So walk your way around, look for any kinks or damage or anything like that. I am a big soft spot for cabriolets. I do love a soft top. These roofs aren't the toughest of roofs though, and I have seen quite a few of them wear. Now this vehicle's done particularly low mileage, and you'll just start to see on the roof here, there's a couple of places that are showing little wear marks, and that's not uncommon. So if it's a cabriolet, make sure the roof is up and look for any damage. Look for any deep mould as well. These roofs do tend to get quite a lot of mould in them, and when I was talking mould, I was like a green algae that can actually be quite difficult to get out and can be quite staining if it's left for a long time. If it's not, it'll just come out quite easily with a jet wash or something. But look at the roof, they are expensive to replace, so it's worth taking your time on that. Work your way around the vehicle, as I say, looking at all the panels, making sure the panel gaps are nice and even. That's sometimes an indication that the vehicle's had bodywork if they're not. And whilst we're talking about roofs, if it is a cabriolet, do make sure you drop the roof all the way down. Make sure it locks and folds away correctly and then goes back up. You want to do that in a reasonable speed, not too slowly, and again, locks correctly and no warning lights or anything from the roof. And as I say, work your way around. Wheels and tyres is something we definitely want to be looking at. A set of tyres on these cars is going to probably cost you about £800–900 or more, depending on what brand you go for. As always, I say you're not going to not buy a car because it's got worn tyres, but you definitely want to be seeing at least 4 or 5 millimetres of tread. Anything less than 4 millimetres, you're going to be up for a new set of tyres very quickly. That is something you want to be having a conversation with the seller of the vehicle about. Low profile tyres, lovely thing, but of course low profile tyres very quickly can turn into curb damage. So look at all the wheels, look for any curb damage. Of course that can be refurbished, but again it's something you want to have a conversation with the seller about if you've got any curb damage. These wheels are quite soft too. So you're not going to pick this up by looking at the vehicle, but when we go out and road test, you want to be feeling for any vibration from the front or the rear. You may just think, oh, that's possibly a tyre out of balance. Don't presume that. These wheels and tyres, these wheels are quite soft and we can get buckles on them. They can also crack. So do take your time on road tests and look out for any sort of vibration you're getting. Have a good look at them physically as well. And because most of these wheels are nice and open, you can get right in and you can see the brakes. Run your finger up and down the brake disc. You want to see if there's a big lip at the top of the disc. That's going to indicate that the brake discs are probably the upper limit of their maximum wear and will need replacing quickly. Set of pads on discs and on a car like this at a main dealer, at least £1,200. At a specialist, maybe £900, £800. You can go after market, of course. You're going to save a little bit more money on that, but you're still talking about a reasonably chunky repair. If you're getting straight into that as soon as you've bought the vehicle, can feel a bit of a disappointment. So check the brake discs, check the brake pads. You can get right in and have a good look at the pads and see how much material is left, and if it's looking a little bit low, something you want to bring into the price when you're discussing it with the seller of the vehicle. For the tyres, look for any damage on the outside. The wheels can get curb damage, but so can the tyres. So look for any chunks or nicks missing from the tyres, any bulges that might indicate that it's got damage to the sidewall. Turn the wheel, have a good look across the whole width of the tyre tread. You want to make sure it's nice and even. So not only is it good tyre and it's got some meat left on it, but is it nice and evenly worn? Uneven tyre wear probably indicates that you've got a geometry problem that might need checking out. Easy to check the front. Put it on full lock, both sides you can do that. For the rears, unfortunately, you're probably getting down on your hands and knees and having a good look across the full tyre. Worth doing though, tyres are expensive as I say. You want to know that they're in good, healthy condition. And another little tip, if you're looking at a slightly older vehicle, maybe as old as 2006 when these XKs first came in, check the date on the tyres. It's a great thing if you've found a 2006 vehicle that's got lovely low mileage, but have the tyres been changed, and actually are the tyres tyres out of date. So look for any cracks or small aging signs on the side wall of the tyres, but also the date stamp on the tyre to make sure that they're still good and safe to use. We've looked at the wheels, we looked at the tyres, we're working our way around the body. These headlight seals can go sometimes, and on a hot day you're never going to see this, but on a damp day you might see some misting collection inside the headlights. That's quite an expensive repair because normally the headlamp itself needs to be changed. So any mist inside the headlight, any significant mist is a sign of a problem that you want to look out for. These bonnets and front of the car, very sporty, very sexy look, but they do tend to pick up quite a lot of stone chips. So as you're working your way around the vehicle, just look and see if there's any stone chips here. The other thing sometimes you'll get is it probably did have stone chips, and sometimes a seller of a vehicle may get a body shop to blow over it very quickly and easily ready for sale, and you just see if it's had any paintwork and see if any of that lacquer is peeling. Once again, you do tend to find if the paintwork isn't prepared properly, they can peel, and that's quite common on these plastic bumpers. So it's not particularly easy to see the radiator either when it's on the ground or up in the air, but bring a torch and try and get right in and have a good look at the condition of the radiator. And what you're really looking for is corrosion at the bottom of the radiator or the oil cooler that is through this grille here. So as I say, bring a torch, have a good look in and look for any debris that's collected around the bottom of the radiator, any road muck, and any corrosion or bending of the radiator fins indicates it probably needs changing. As you're working your way around the car looking for stone chips and nicks and dents and things like that, make sure you check out the windscreen. It's a big old screen, they're bonded in, they're quite expensive to change, so just see if there's any stone chips or anything like that on the vehicle. Now this is a later vehicle, it's a 5 litre. The 4 litre had an aerial about here. I don't know why Jaguar continued to fit electric aerials after 2006, but they did. Bit of a thing from the 80s really. The electric aerials, like all electric aerials, can be a nightmare. They can jam up, they get water and grit into them that stop them working. They can get caught on things and get kinks so they don't retract properly. So if it's got an aerial, make sure you turn the radio on and off and it goes all the way up and all the way down. And the other thing that might be a bit surprising is, you know, these vehicles are aluminium bodied. You think they don't rust, but sometimes they do get corrosion. So look around all the wheel arches and all the boot lids and places like this. Sometimes you can just get a little bit of bubbling in the paint, which is a sign of aluminium corrosion. It can actually be incredibly difficult to treat once it sets in. Unlikely to affect a vehicle as new as this one, but the older ones, I've seen it, it can be there and it can spread all across the bottom of the sills too. So look across the bottom of the sills, look around the wheel arches and any nooks and crannies anywhere that dampness may have sat for some time and started to corrode the aluminium. Okay, of course, so one of the advantages of having a garage with ramps is we can get the car up in the air and we can get a good look underneath. When of course you're looking to buy a car, you're normally on somebody's driveway and maybe that's not quite so easy to do, but do get under these cars, because one of the things I really want to show you is the rust and corrosion that can be a huge problem as these cars get older. Now, this is actually a really lovely clean example. It's a 2013 car, so one of the last ones, and there's actually not much corrosion under here at all. But on an older car, it can really set in surprisingly quickly. So I wanted to show you some of the key points to look at while you're underneath the car that you know, on a slightly older vehicle may become a problem quite quickly. And the first of that is really this subframe. Now, this subframe, of course, is steel. The vehicle body is aluminium, and a lot of people think, oh, it's an aluminium car, it's not going to corrode. And that might be okay for most of the top half, but underneath it can be a completely different story. And this subframe, this is a real problem as the cars get older. You can already see on this car, there's certain points where it's just starting to rust. If this isn't treated within 2 to 3 years, this can become very corroded. It's an incredibly large lump of metal that goes across the whole back of the car. It holds the rear differential together, and it's a hell of a job to change, and it's a very expensive item too. And if you are not careful, as the cars get sort of a little bit older, 15 years or so, this could actually be a car killer. The cost of repairing this can be so much, you actually start wondering if the car is able to stay on the road. So when you've got a car, particularly say if it's over 10 years old that you're looking at, which most of these will be now, of course, take a good look at this subframe. All of these mounts are all steel, and where they mount onto the body is steel, and these rust very, very badly. And again, up here onto the body, follow the subframe around and have a good look at it. On an older car, you probably aren't going to look very far before you find some rust. What you really want to see is is it really got penetrated into the metal, or can it be rubbed down, prepared and wax treated in some way to stop the corrosion? So that's one crucial area. Whilst we're here underneath the car, do look at these differentials. Often they're absolutely fine, but they do tend to leak a little bit, typically from where the drive shaft goes in, and you'll see some misting or oil wetness on the bottom of the differential here. Definitely something you want to look at. Check where the drive shafts go in on either side of the differential too, and again look for any damp spots. Work your way through the car, particularly honing in, if you can, while you're underneath, looking for metal components that are not aluminium, and that's where you're going to see some of these issues. As I say, fortunately this is quite a nice car, it's in very good condition. If I owned this myself, I would be wax treating it either with something like Lanogard now or a wax oil, and I would do that every 2 years. And if you own one of these vehicles and you plan on keeping it, please do rust treat them. Don't be looking at the body and thinking, oh, it's nice and shiny, it's in great condition, it's not going to rust. Underneath it can develop into an absolute rusting nightmare. So look after them. If you do use them through the winter, particularly in the spring, get the underneath jet washed off and get a fresh coat of either Lanogard or wax oil and keep it rust free. And it'll save you an absolute fortune in time. A lot of these components, these steering and suspension components, are steel too and will rust, and the brake lines too need checking. On the older cars, they will rust through as well, and again, of course, can give you quite an expensive repair bill in time. Again, while we're under the engine, do look for oil leaks. Not a big problem, but I have seen quite a lot of the crank pulleys leak. The crankshaft at the front can leak, and you'll often see a dribble of oil at the front. Sumps can leak too. This one is bone dry. That's what you want to be looking at. Interestingly enough though, you will see a little bit of oil here on the back oil shaft. You can just see some dampness here where the engine meets the gearbox. That's an indication possibly the rear main is starting to leak. Could be a gearbox leak. I think more likely rear main. That's something you'd want to pick up on, and this is an example here, is actually a bit damp and starting to leak. And just check the gearbox sump pan too to make sure there's no misting or oil around that. Other than that, one thing I do want to show you, front of the car. They do collect quite a lot of road debris and dust and mud, and things can come in through the grille, and it sits just on the bottom of the radiator. And at the front you've got the main radiator, and you've also got a oil cooling radiator. That rust and that debris collects on the radiator, stays damp, and actually can cause quite a lot of rust and corrosion of the radiators. And I've seen many of them needing to have the oil cooler radiator changed simply for corrosion. So when you've got one of these cars, get in there with a steam cleaner, get in there with a jet wash and get all of that debris out. And when you're looking for one on the road, when you're looking to buy one, see, and if you can, it's not the easiest thing to inspect with this big panel here, but from the front you can sort of see the radiators, see if you've got a collection of debris in there, any rust and corrosion that's building up on the radiators, one to look out for. The XKR was originally launched with a 4.2 normally aspirated or supercharged engine. That was in 2006. In 2009/2010, that was changed and upgraded for the later 5-litre engine. Both engines are incredibly reliable and very strong. Couple of things you do want to be looking out for though. First of all, both of these engines with high mileage can start to get a little bit noisy from the timing chain area. And what you're going to hear on startup when the vehicle is running is a rattle from the front of the engine. It can be quite slight, but the longer you leave it, the louder and louder it gets, and ultimately you can't leave it too long. What you're hearing really is your timing chain has stretched a little bit and is starting to rattle. It's longer than the tensioners in there can now longer cope with, and it's making a rattling sound. As that stretching gets worse, eventually your timing chain will fail, and that will lead to catastrophic engine failure. So if you own one of these vehicles, always just listen out for this noise. You know, every now and again start the vehicle up with the bonnet open and have a little listen and make sure it's nice and quiet, because it starts quite gentle. It does get louder as the problem gets worse. And if you're looking to buy a vehicle, you want to have a good listen to the front of the engine and listening for any sort of rattling, tapping, scraping sound. It really is quite more of a scrape than anything else. And if you get any noise like that, get it professionally checked before you buy the vehicle. It's a really quite expensive repair to do. Some people will take the engine out to do it. You can strip off the front of the car, but really the engine probably needs to come out to do that. And you're talking about a lot of labour hours and quite expensive parts too. Don't let that put you off. It's really quite rare. We're talking about quite high mileage vehicles, but it can happen, so do listen out for it. 4.2 engines generally are very, very strong. The 5-litre engine does suffer in a couple of places from water leaks, so that didn't affect the 4.2, funny enough. On the whole, I think I probably prefer the 5-litre. It's a really nice, powerful engine, and with the engine came a lot of other upgrades too, like an electronically controlled rear diff, a different gearbox setup inside the car with a pop-up gear selector. Got quite a few extra nice things to have, but with it came a couple of water leak issues. And this is unfortunately water leaks that tend to happen underneath the supercharger from something that's called the Y-pipe. You can't see it as you're looking under the bonnet. It's under this plastic case, but not only is it under this plastic casing, it's underneath the supercharger itself. So there's not a lot you can expect to see. What you will often get is a sweet, sticky smell of burning coolant. And that's because the water, when this Y-pipe starts to leak, trickles down into the valley of the engine. You don't see it hit the floor because it never does. It sits in the valley of the engine, which gets very hot. The coolant evaporates and you get either little whiffs of steam coming out from this engine cover or from under the bonnet, or you get a sweet, sticky smell of coolant. Anything like that, you definitely want to get investigated. Check the coolant level by all means, but the chances are if it's got a little bit of a coolant leak, the seller has probably topped that up, so there's nothing to see there. So the best chance you've got really is looking for any sort of smell or any whiffs of steam when you come back from road test. Quite a difficult repair to do, I say, because the supercharger does have to come off. And that's called the Y-pipe. So that's something you want to look out for. Other thing under the bonnet, this can affect again both the 4.2 and the 5 litres. With mileage, and particularly with hard driving, the superchargers can become a little bit noisy. And the superchargers can become a bit noisy in two ways. The front coupler bearing can develop too much free play. In my experience, it can come with mileage and also particularly affecting vehicles that have been driven quite hard. The easiest way, or the most professional way in some ways, to check that coupler bearing, take this cover off, take the belt off the supercharger itself, have the top supercharger pulley in your hand, and you can rock it from side to side. If it's got too much free play, it will literally move quite a lot and it will knock at either end of that free play if you turn it quite hard in your hand. Not necessarily the easiest thing to check on somebody's driveway when you're looking potentially to purchase their vehicle. So there's another tip I'll give you. With the engine running, push the button to shut the engine down and the engine should just shut down. But when that coupler's got too much free play, it tends to knock. So you'll turn the engine off and you get a donk, donk, donk after the engine shuts down. Literally, it's almost a part of the shutdown process. Happens quite quickly, but it's quite distinctive and it's there. You can start the engine up again and test it again. It's almost certainly going to be there again. That knocking is too much free play in that top supercharger coupler and a sign that that coupler needs to be changed. So something you want to check for. Another way this supercharger can let you down with time and mileage is the main bearings can become noisy. Again, there's nothing to see. They're inside the supercharger itself. What you will hear is a scraping gravel type noise. Literally, it's not a rattle, it's more of a scraping noise from the top of the engine in here. Anything like that at all is a very strong indication that your supercharger needs at best to be rebuilt, which can be done if they're caught early. If they're left too long in that condition, which many drivers will do, not on purpose, but it's not a really, really loud noise. It's just a sort of scraping sound with the bonnet shut, driving down the motorway and the radio on. You don't even hear it. What you're getting there is your bearings are slowly breaking up. If they're not done quite quickly, quite a lot of damage can happen inside the supercharger. When you take it apart to recondition it, there's too much damage and ultimately you're talking about a new supercharger. That's about £2,500 for the parts alone. So when you're looking for a vehicle with it idling, just listen for noises from the front, could be timing chain, noises and scraping from the top is more likely to be supercharger. Can affect both of these engines with time and mileage and can be quite an expensive repair to carry out. Other than that, and I mean, I really don't want to put you off, these engines are very, very strong. They're really good for the mileage. Do check that service history. They do need the very regular oil changes that the service history requires, but if they're well maintained, hundreds of thousands of miles literally can be covered virtually trouble-free. These XKRs are equipped with CAT suspension, so this is electronically controlled suspension dampers. So rather than just a traditional shock absorber that absorbs the bumps in the roads, these actually adjust electronically to the drive setting in the car and how the vehicle has been driven. The suspension on these is really, really great. but these suspension, in my opinion, good for about 80,000 miles, certainly max of 100,000 miles, and then you normally need to replace the dampers. They can knock, sometimes knock from, sounds like a knock from the top of this suspension area here, but actually often it's inside the damper, particularly on a high mileage car. And so if you're looking at a car 80,000 miles and the dampers have not been changed, it's likely they're going to probably need to be done quite quickly, and that can come with quite repairable because they are electronic and they're a little bit more than the normal traditional suspension dampers. When you're chatting to the seller of the vehicle, if they've had it for any time, do ask them if they have had the gearbox oil changed. I find that it's often missed, and at 80,000 miles it can make all the difference. So the gearboxes can start to become a little bit sticky, holding onto the gears, a bit glitchy if you like. It's always worth seeing if the gearbox oil's been changed. If it hasn't and the vehicle's done 80,000 miles, it's something you definitely want to consider doing as soon as you take ownership. And here we are on the inside of this XK. And I do really like these cabins actually. They're nice and spacious. I think they're really nicely ergonomically designed. It's worth checking a lot of the gizmos while you're in here. And I'll be the first to say, some of the media system and the sat nav, it's pretty basic really, and it certainly isn't modern and what you may be used to in a newer car. So it's not going to talk to your iPhone, it hasn't got Bluetooth connection, and that can be a little bit frustrating, and the sat nav is also pretty basic too. But on the whole, you know, it works, it's nice, it's got some nice features in here. As the cars get a little bit older, it's worth spending a bit of time just familiarising yourself with all of these features and making sure they're still working. So you've got the electric seats. Do they work properly? Do they go up and down? Do the heated seats come on correctly? Does the satellite navigation work? Check all the buttons on the steering wheel and make sure they work okay. They are prone to going quite sticky, and this can be a little bit of a problem. You can remove some of the stickiness with something like a makeup removing pad, is particularly quite good for this. But I do find even once you clean them, the stickiness comes back, and ultimately you might be talking about some new switchgear on the steering wheel, for example. But you know, try cleaning it. It does work to an extent, but when you're looking round a vehicle, it might be something you want to try and have a little bit of a haggle about, because it just frankly feels nasty on the fingers. Check the glove box. It should have a very nice slow release on the glove box itself, on the lid, but quite often that fails and you push the button and donk, just falls down. It's a minor thing, but it's worth just checking to see if that works. Headlinings. Now this vehicle obviously is a cabriolet, so it doesn't have a fixed headlining. The cars, the coupes that do have a fixed headlining, they are a little bit prone to coming down. Often starts at the rear window, headline starts to drop, and then it slowly creeps its way across the car. So have a good look around the headlining, particularly at the back, and see if there's any signs of that coming down and failing. I do find actually the leather seats and the leather in the car in general is much better than the earlier ones. The early XKs, the steel bodies on those vehicles, I used to find that the bolsters wear very quickly. They start to break down and get soft, and the leather cracks. The later XKs from 2006, the aluminium bodied style as this is, I find the interior wears much better. Can also be prone to water leaks though inside, often from the air conditioning unit that sits behind the dashboard here. The vents outside, the drains can become blocked, and you can end up with water coming down either on the passenger side or the driver's side and leaking into the footwell. Get down on your hands and knees, get under the mats if the mats are fitted to the front footwells, and have a good feel around inside the car to see if you've got any dampness on any of the carpets. And if you're collecting steam in the corner of the windscreens or in the back screen, for example, there's any misting or steam, that's nearly always a sign that there's water ingress somewhere in the car, and the chances are you've got a water leak. I would start probably looking at the air conditioning vents and drains to make sure that the water is draining outside rather than inside. Do also check that the handbrake or the parking brake is working. They can be a little bit problematic. They've got their own separate calipers on these cars, so the brakes seem to be working fine, but a lot of people with the automatics don't necessarily use the parking brake. They just put it into park. That can cause them to actually seize up in time, so make sure your handbrake engages and disengages properly as you're inspecting the vehicle. One of my absolute golden tips on buying a modern Jaguar is always arm yourself with a fault code reader. It doesn't necessarily have to be an expensive one like this. You can buy yourself as cheap as chips a fault code reader these days on places like eBay. These Jaguars do love to collect fault codes. Quite often they're triggered actually by things like low battery voltage. So in the winter, on a cold morning, battery's maybe not as new as it once was, struggles for voltage a little bit, car still starts, but what you don't know, in the background it's ranked up a whole load of fault codes. Very simple to clear them down, and actually nothing to worry about once your battery voltage has come back up. But sometimes hidden in all those fault codes can be a real issue. So not every seller of every vehicle is going to love you turning up with a fault code reader, but there's a reason for that. So I myself with a fault code reader, plug into the OBD port, read off the fault codes and see just what we've got on our hands here. Make a note of all of those codes, and then we're going to go out on road test. We're going to do a nice big long road test. At the end of that road test, I want you to plug back in with your fault code reader and see if any of those codes have come back. If they have, you know you've got a serious permanent problem that needs investigating. So top tip, do not buy one of these cars without understanding exactly what fault codes you've got present in the ECU and if they are permanent codes and have come back on a road test. If the seller of the vehicle isn't keen on you using a diagnostic code reader and doesn't want you to take the codes off the vehicle, be very concerned and very suspicious. With all your diagnostic fault codes read, it's now time to start the engine, let it warm up and have a good listen to it. Hopefully the seller of the vehicle has listened to you and you're starting up from cold. I think that's always a nice thing. So before you head straight out on road test, let the engine warm up. Take the opportunity, have a good look around the car, listen to the engine. You'll often find they're a little bit tappety and rattly when you first start them up from cold. Perfectly normal, don't worry about that. You'll actually hear within moments it'll start to quieten down, and within 2 or 3 minutes it should be sitting there purring quite quietly. Look for any strange exhaust gases or anything like that, any strange noises as we've talked about. If the engine is now idling nicely and the vehicle is warming up, probably time to head out on road test. I absolutely love these 5-litre engines. They're smooth, they're powerful, they're coupled with this lovely pop-up gear selector, and also really importantly on the 5-litre cars they've got this electronically controlled rear diff, which is perfect. It's like a limited slip diff but much better. So it really helps you get the power down, and if one wheel starts to slip it diverts the power and keeps the car going. And I have to be honest, sometimes when you're driving these cars, shall we say rather enthusiastically, you sometimes wonder, is that me driving or is that now the car taking over slightly? It's nice, it's not aggressive, but it's just there and helps keep you out of trouble with all of this brake horsepower. While we are out on road test, it's time obviously to start looking and making sure the car is driving correctly. And I'm not going to do all of these things now because obviously I'm driving and trying to talk to the camera, but on road test, you do want to get a good feel for how the car feels on the road. As these cars get a little bit older, the suspension bushes can become quite warm, and what you'll find as they start to wear is the car will feel quite loose and disconnected from the road. This is a gentleman's touring car at its best in many ways, and they are sometimes, I find, a little bit soft. If you compare it to something like the F-Type, it's much harder, much more of an aggressive driving racing car. This is more of a saloon car, if you like, a GT touring car. Graceful on the road, can be a little bit soft, but as they get older, those bushes get a little bit more tired, and what you'll find is when you're going into a corner, car no longer feels certain. It kind of, if I'm honest, can, in some sort of circumstance, can even feel a little bit scary as you try to go into a corner with some aggression and some speed. You think, hang on, this doesn't actually feel like it's going to go where I want it to go anymore. That is almost definitely a sign that the suspension bushes are becoming a bit tired and probably need to be changed. Other than that, do take the opportunity to drive the car as fast as you can, keeping to the speed limit, of course. We want a nice, firm, strong acceleration. That's what we're really looking for. We want to listen for any noises, and we want to see if the car pulls at all as you're accelerating. So plant your foot down on the accelerator, as I say, keeping of course within the speed limit, and see if the steering feels right. If the car wants to pull in a nice straight line, that's quite a good sign. Head into some bends. You want a nice left hand bend and a nice right hand bend, and feel how the car sits on the road. Does it pull around that bend nice and smoothly, or does it feel quite uncertain? Once we're at cruising speed and the car is performing well, check your mirrors, make sure there's no one behind you and it's a good place to do it, and plant your foot nice and firmly on the brake. We want to make sure that you can brake hard, that the ABS is working, and that the car doesn't pull to the left or the right when braking, and there's no vibration through the brake pedal, which would indicate that some brake pads or discs are slightly worn or distorted. And that can happen particularly if people have taken the vehicle on a track day. The brakes can get a little bit too hot and you can get distortion in the discs. You will feel that when braking hard. A vibration or a pulsing through the brake pedal is the sign of that, and you're almost certainly in for a set of pads and discs at the very best. So there's just a couple of things you want to check out. Make sure it goes through the gears, of course, correctly. Make sure your paddle shifts are working on the gearbox, so you have control of being able to go up and down the gearbox correctly. It doesn't hold onto the gears too long and seems to check and change gears correctly. So as you're driving the car, do listen out for any strange noises. Obviously we've talked about suspension knocking and groaning. Try and find a speed bump or two if you can. Go over them at a nice slow speed, but listen for any groaning or straining from suspension parts. Listen for anything like exhaust heat shields rattling. As the cars get older, some of the heat shields can start to corrode, sit on the exhaust system and cause quite an annoying little chatter from somewhere. Listen for any strange engine noises, of course, and wind noise and things from maybe doors that have had body work or windows that aren't sealing correctly. So, you know, have the radio off and just listen for any strange noises. Make sure your air conditioning is working while you're here. Take the opportunity again to play with any of the buttons and make sure things are working correctly. Again, the satellite navigation, for example, is working correctly. So that quite literally is my full list of things to look out for. Of course, if you're looking for a vehicle, it's always worthwhile looking at a few of these buyer's guide videos and doing a bit more research. But I actually have quite a short list because generally I find these vehicles incredibly reliable. They're an absolute joy to drive. They feel great on the road, and personally I'd highly recommend one, and particularly the 5 litre would be my top tip. I just find them a slightly better, more reliable vehicle. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and of course if you've got any questions at all, do let us know. We offer a full range of servicing and modifications for these vehicles. In fact, this one actually has been in with us for our 650 brake horsepower conversion this week. So we can take up the power quite considerably. We do a lovely range of exhaust systems and normal service and maintenance too. If you're looking for a vehicle or you already own one and you've got any questions about ownership or maintenance, we'd love to hear from you. We're here to help. Do join us on Facebook on our Jaguar Mod Squad group. You're very welcome to join us there, where you'll see lots of other owners with their hints and tips of ownership. And keep tuned.